Hello everyone, this is Sam over at the Foot Whisperer Reflexology Institute here today with another foot reading video for you. If you've been following the series, this is video number 8. We would love for you to join if you would like to see your feet on the foot reading video series. Feel free to send them to sam@footwhisperer.com. That is the personal email that I check every day here at the Institute. You can also join the conversation on our foot reading and reflexology online community group on Facebook. That's FROC, F-R-R-O-C for short. And just as a reminder as well, these videos are not meant to DPT, diagnose, prescribe, or treat. Instead, they're always aimed to ACE, or assess, coach, and educate. Without further ado, we've got 2 sets of amazing feet to look at, and enjoy the video. Okie dokie, everyone. So here we go. We're looking at our first pair of feet. These feet were donated by Laura, who's up in Canada. Thank you so much, Laura, for donating your feet to the foot reading video series on our channel. And let's jump right into our first marker. This one is a little bit hard to see on the video, I know, but it is a birthmark. And we've talked about birthmarks before. This one is relatively small, so again, if we think of like the size of the birthmark indicating the size of the issue, or in this case, the weakness or dysfunction, this is relatively small, but it's still significant enough for me to see. So I did just want to bring it up in the foot reading so that we understand a little bit about kind of maybe what would be an underlying cause for some of the symptoms that Laura may be experiencing, both physically and mentally and emotionally. So this birthmark is on the right foot dorsal ankle in vertical zone 1, horizontal zone 4. Horizontal zone 4 on the top of the foot specifically, right over the dorsal ankle, representing all of those pelvic muscle and reproductive reflexes. So this is a marker for reproductive weakness physically, as well as weakness in the muscles of the pelvis. Not something that I like to see on females, but something that is just good to know if you do have birthmarks around this area. It's just the body saying that this general vicinity is weaker than it should be. That could manifest as something like psoas dysfunction if we were to look at muscles, kind of that feeling that the hips are always wobbly, not necessarily in alignment, but it could also mean that reproductive hormones, specifically the right side of the reproductive system, is firing not on all cylinders. So just something to be aware of for Laura's constitution and something that her body has made us aware of. And let's jump to marker number 2. Oop, kept that circle on that marker, but that's okay. So these 2 concentric circles up at the top by the toes, here we see earth deviations. So when we think of symptoms in terms of earth, air, fire, water, earth representing that thickness, denseness, width. Also, any deviation of bone would technically be an earth marker, or that kind of rigid foundational shifting of the tectonic plates of the body. So we see that there's pressure around the bunion area, there's a clear deviation of that distal phalange, that distal phalanx of the big toe. So there's a lot of chest and head misalignments happening as well, probably from the weakness in the pelvis, so if we wanted to rope in that first marker. But here we see the toes kind of jutting out more outside of that midline, indicating that the occipital area right at that C1, C2 area will constantly be out of alignment. And then it's largely due to that building pressure in that bunion area representing that center of the chest. So thoracic area and cervical area are not really playing too nicely together. The reason why I kept that circle kind of subconsciously circled over that birthmark is if we wanted to think of these markers mentally and emotionally, there's the birthmark on the right side, which is past, horizontal zone 4, family and relationships. It's also on the top of the foot, meaning that in the past, Laura had a family issue that everybody saw, and it was a public affair, and it did kind of bring that, what would be a scarring or a dysfunction to the surface, but it is in the past. Now, Laura is suffering from a little bit of mental, emotional kind of deviations. Her thoughts and feelings are a little bit out of alignment, not necessarily as easy to bring them back in to that proper stacking, if you wanted to use that physical term. And it could be because of that kind of lingering feeling of being burned family-wise in the past. But you know, if we think of it big picture, who doesn't have a dysfunctional family? But in a foot reading, these would all be significant markers to bring up with Laura to integrate some of that more coaching aspect. Is the mind affecting the body? Is the heart affecting the body? Or vice versa? Are the weakness in the hormones or the structural deviations of the head and neck and shoulders affecting the internal state and Laura's ability to feel well? So, all things to consider. Now let's jump to the last marker on the dorsal aspect of the foot here, back to the toes, but we can also see a baby bunion forming as well. So baby bunions are, as opposed to in line with the big toe, in line with the little toe, you can see that joint is slightly swollen, not necessarily because of fluid, but because of that earth quality, that denseness, that bone rigidity. And that fifth toe represents the influence of the lower body on the neck, if we wanted to zone it in vertical zone 5, horizontal zone 1. So a little bit of knee instability, which we'll actually talk about in the next picture, influencing that misalignment of the neck. Mentally and emotionally, Jane Sheehan, in her book Let's Read Our Feet, talks about the tilt of the little toe extensively. It's one of the things that I appreciate about her book is that emphasis on the smaller details. And here we see that toe is really rotated out towards the side, and it's very pronounced, almost as if it's kind of pushing itself away from the other toes. This indicates that Laura is very much a rebel. She's always thinking about the future, how to break the mold, how to really take things to the next level. Very creative and courageous person, but that can also come at a dark side, a detriment. Not being able to conform, not being able to stick to the rules could also mentally and emotionally affect Laura. But back to that idea of both the reflexes representing physical and mental emotional, understanding that yes, we're seeing Laura's sense of security influencing her thoughts, vertical zone 5, horizontal zone 1, but also that physical deviation, that lower body affecting the neck. So toggling in between the two, and then also always coming back to that birthmark, because the body has placed that dot there for a very specific reason, that pelvic instability, that instability of family and relationships, kind of influencing that upper body rigidity. Okay? So now let's go to our last photo, marker number 4. There's only one really that I wanted to point out on the plantar surface. Plantar surface actually looks really good. In her email to me, Laura had talked about how her husband always jokes that she has really, really thick feet, this isn't really something that is bad, but it does denote part of her constitution. So you've noticed that I've been talking a lot about earth markers. She has a very earthy constitution. Her feet are thicker, denser, wider, more able to hold resources, but also a little bit more stuck around the joints. So just something to consider as far as constitutional elements. But here we see what's known as the proximal head of the fifth metatarsal. Some really intense anatomy there for you. That proximal head represents the knee reflex, the direct joint reflex for the knee. When it's pronounced like that, automatically indicates knee pressure. So back to that idea of the fifth toe kind of being separate, being slightly curved, that vertical zone 5 influencing horizontal zone 1, that lower body influencing the neck, seems like the knees are agreeing. The knees being that proximal head of the fifth metatarsal, how they're really kind of splaying out to the side more so than other feet. If you wanted to look at pictures, you'll definitely see that deviation. Actually, next feet, we'll be able to see a good contrast with that as well. But that deviation of that proximal head represents knee pressure. So understanding that that physical influence is going to be very present with Laura. Also with that vertical zone 5 influence, that sense of security, constantly needing to watch that ability to feel grounded, stable with Laura. Seems like that's going to be an ongoing theme, just contentment, being satisfied where you are, not needing to push forward so much. There's a healthy line between kind of running a crusade and being an activist in your own community. Those two levels of mental emotional influence just need to be checked at the door every once in a while when we're analyzing Laura's reflexes. Okay, now let's go to our second pair of feet. The second pair of feet was donated by Suzanne. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for sending in your feet. We'll jump right to the dorsal surface, and we're only going to look at 2 markers here, 3 really, because they're all kind of bunched together. But you can see right off the bat how pulled up these tendons are, how flexed these dorsal tendons are. But you'll notice that there are only 3 of them on the left and 3 on the left, 1 on the right that are what I would call popped or raised. This is extremely significant. This is what's known as a fire marker. Fire markers are resulting in anything that's redness, painful, spasm, but also muscular and tendon related. So these pop tendons indicate excessive fire or excessive drive, passion, irritability, frustration, but also excitement and joy. Just too much of that kind of overwhelming heat would be the best way to say it. And here we see on the left side, we're in vertical zone 1 in line with the big toe, and then in vertical zones 4 and 5 in line with the 4th and 5th toe. And this is really where we get into breaking down the vertical zone, so it's really important to know when that first tendon in line with the big toe is popped, that vertical zone 1 tendon, I always tell my clients with this tendon, you are being way too hard on yourself. That's a really, really intense marker to have because it means literally your thoughts and opinions are wound so tightly that it's influencing everything else, both physically and mentally and emotionally. Then we have, in line with the 4th and 5th toe, that vertical zone of family and relationships and then sense of security. Those are popped too. So it seems like with Suzanne, she's really putting way too much pressure on herself, regardless of if it is a real thing that she can't control, or if it's just her perception of the situation. Her body is going into fight or flight mode on a very deep level in order to produce these markers. But if we wanted to compare right side versus left side is clearly more agitated. That means that more recently, Suzanne has actually increased her stress level from past to present. Right foot representing past, we only see that 4th tendon that's really popped in the picture, meaning that her family and relationships have always been rather stressful, the influence of that factor, but more recently, it's really come to a head, and those tendons are really letting us know that. From a physical standpoint, that would indicate a lot of tension in the back body. So spasms along the spinal column, weird pinching sensations around the back of the ribs, into that what would be that upper back area, that kind of thoracic spine in between the shoulder blades. All of that would be prone to those fire symptoms of pain, spasm, just rigid tightness, not necessarily rigid in terms of like an earth marker, but more of that constant feeling of pulsing tightness, that heat, that almost volcanic quality to the tissues. Okay, now, let's check the plantar surface. Okay, so I didn't even choose a marker here because the plantar surface gives us so much information and we need to really break this down step by step without isolating any particular area. So on the top, we saw markers for stress, fire markers specifically. That would also, the top of the foot being kind of how the world sees you, what's on the surface, the perception of what's open to the public, kind of, if you wanted to look at it that way. The soles of the feet, as a general meaning, represent both the front of the body, but also the things that we keep underneath the surface, the more deeper aspects. So on the surface, Suzanne is displaying tension, but on the plantar surface, underneath the surface, all of these lines indicate chronic exhaustion. These lines don't appear overnight. There's just so much weakness that's happening in the body here, probably because this stress has been building for a very, very long time. So whenever we see lining, this isn't just wrinkles. This is what we refer to as lining in the markers. These lines representing that air quality, over circulation, overextension, dryness, weakness, kind of flitting from place to place without taking a break, without taking kind of time for yourself, losing track of time. All of that just overextension being the meaning of these lines. We can really see it start in horizontal zone 2 in that chest space, but also that emotional space. And then we see almost a little bit of redness as well start to form around that bunion area, indicating that emotional frustration, that pressure in the chest, but can also be just that constant state of excitement, needing to go, go, go. We go into horizontal zone 3 in the upper digestive space, and the markers for that lining really get intense, more so on the right side than the left side, but both pretty intense, representing that upper digestive weakness. Seems like Suzanne isn't eating appropriately, not taking the time to digest her meals. If we wanted to think of it from an elemental balance, that dryness, that weakness needs to be hydrated, moistened, nourished. So upping the quality of food as well, incorporating more vegetables, more stews, more soups, more things that will hydrate, nourish, and replenish the vital tissues of the body. Then in horizontal zone 4, we can see some actual strong vertical lines being present as well, right over the kidneys, indicating kidney reflexes, indicating dehydration, back to that kind of need to nourish and moisten, but also lower digestive fatigue. Then when we get into the heels, everything starts to calm down a little bit. We don't really see intense cracking. There's a nice pink hue that starts to come back into the tissues. So it's really that horizontal zones 2, 3, and 4, that chest, lung, heart area, shoulders as well, then upper digestive, lower digestive is where all of that weakness is really centralized. So it seems like part of the issue with Suzanne is that she needs to carve out time to get back onto her fundamental dietary routine, making sure that she is fed, she is nourished, so that she can tackle all of her to-dos, which, from what we can see, are really starting to hit the breaking point for her. So that's something that Suzanne needs to work on, just those regimented scheduling of the basic fundamentals. But if we wanted to just really quickly look at that proximal head of the fifth metatarsal, not necessarily present, not as pronounced as it was for Laura. So Suzanne doesn't really have a lot of joint issues specifically, whereas Laura had it all in the joints, the head, the neck, the knees, all of that influence is not present in Suzanne. Instead, hers is muscular and dietary. Laura had a perfect digestive system. There were no markers for digestive dysfunction, meaning that that's not a factor. Could be hormonal with that marker over the top of the dorsal ankle, but really all of Laura's issues are in the bones. Here we see with Suzanne, everything's in the dietary areas, everything's in the emotional areas, everything's about calming down that fire and getting back to the bare necessities of self-care. Okay, so those are our 2 feet. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you would like to be featured in our foot reading video series, please feel free to send them to me. You can send them to me at sam@footwhisperer.com. Also, follow our posts on Instagram and join our foot reading and reflexology online community group on Facebook. That's FROC, F-R-R-O-C, Foot Reading and Reflexology online community group. And stay tuned, like, subscribe, share the videos, and let's give some power back to the art and science of foot reading.